They called him the forgotten Trump, the silent one, but they never asked why he was silent. For years, Barron Trump existed in the background, a quiet, almost mysterious figure in one of the most powerful families in the world. Unlike his father, whose voice could shake the political landscape with a single tweet, Barron remained an enigma. He never sought the spotlight. He never gave the media what they craved, a controversial quote, an outburst, a soundbite they could twist into a narrative. And because he gave them nothing, they assumed there was nothing there. They whispered, "He's just a kid. He's just another spoiled rich boy riding on his father's last name. He's sheltered, protected, irrelevant." The media moved on, content to label him as the silent Trump. But what they never considered was that maybe, just maybe, Barron wasn't silent out of weakness. Maybe he was silent because he was watching. Because in a world that moves too fast, that rewards those who speak first and think later, those who shout the loudest, Barron Trump did something different. He listened. He observed how the media worked, how they built people up just to tear them down. He watched how politicians played the game, how they spun words, twisted facts, and manipulated public perception. And he saw how the world had already decided who he was before he had ever spoken a single word. But what they didn't realize, what they never saw coming, was that one day he would speak. And when he did, the world would never see him the same way again. The world wasn't ready for Barron Trump, but when the challenge came, he knew exactly what to do. It started with a single headline. A well-known political commentator, someone who had built a career on attacking the Trump family, had set his sights on the youngest one. On live television, with cameras rolling and millions watching, he smirked and said, "Let's be honest, folks. We all know why Barron Trump stays out of the public eye. It's because he has nothing to say. If his last name wasn't Trump, no one would care about him at all." The panelists laughed, the audience clapped, and just like that, Barron Trump became a punchline. Within hours, the internet erupted. Memes, jokes, clips from the broadcast. Everyone seemed eager to tear him down. And Barron, he said nothing, not a tweet, not a statement, not a single response, because unlike the critics, unlike the journalists desperate for a reaction, Barron Trump knew something they didn't. Silence is power. And then, the email arrived. An invitation. At first glance, it seemed like nothing special, just another event among thousands happening across the country. But this wasn't just any event. It was the Leadership Summit, a gathering of some of the most powerful, influential minds in America, CEOs, senators, intellectuals, and journalists. The very people who had spent years dismissing him. And now, they wanted him to speak. The topic, the future of leadership in America. Barron read the email once, then again. And as he did, a thought crossed his mind. They think I'm just a name. They think I have nothing to say. And that was precisely why. He was going to say yes. He had two choices, stay silent or step up. And Barron Trump chose the latter. The event was unlike anything Barron Trump had ever stepped into. The room was filled with some of the most powerful voices in politics, media, and business. A crowd that had already decided he didn't belong. The air was thick with expectation, not of his success, but of his failure. They weren't here to hear him speak. They were here to watch him crumble. The moderator adjusted his microphone, clearing his throat. Welcome to the Leadership Summit. Today we discuss the future of leadership in America, and we begin with our first speaker. A pause, a glance toward him. Mr. Trump, the floor is yours. The moment had arrived. Barron stood slowly, straightening his suit jacket, walking toward the podium. Eyes followed his every move, waiting, Some eager, some amused, some certain that he was about to make a fool of himself. He could hear the whispers, the murmurs of doubt, the snickers. He wasn't supposed to be here, and yet he was. He placed his hands on the podium, took a deep breath, and let his eyes scan the audience. Not with fear, not with hesitation, but with something far more dangerous to his critics: confidence. The crowd was still, waiting, expecting a shaky voice, an uncertain delivery. Instead, Barron spoke, and when he did, the entire room changed. One sentence, that's all it took. But what did he say? His voice was steady, measured, devoid of the hesitation they had been expecting. "I find it interesting," Barron began, "that the people most obsessed with my last name are the ones who claim it doesn't matter." Silence. The crowd had been prepared for excuses, for stammering, for an awkward defense. They hadn't been prepared for that. A ripple of tension spread through the room. Some exchanged glances, some sat up straighter, others blinked, caught off guard. He let the words linger, knowing their weight, knowing that for the first time in his life, the narrative was in his hands. He continued, "For years, I've been told that my last name is the only reason I'm relevant. And yet, those same critics have built their entire careers off talking about it." A shift in the air. "They say I'm not qualified to speak. And yet, they never stop speaking about me." A few in the audience began to nod, even some of his biggest critics. "If my name is all that matters, then why are we even having this conversation?" And just like that, the balance of power in the room shifted. The journalist who had criticized him, the one sitting in the front row smirking just minutes earlier, now looked uncertain. As if for the first time he was seeing Barron Trump not as a name, but as a mind. The reaction wasn't immediate. At first, there was only silence, then a slow realization. The truth in his words began to sink in. The murmurs started. A few scattered claps, then more, and then applause, genuine, unforced, from the very people who had come expecting his failure. And Barron? He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply walked back to his seat, because he knew his point had been made. One sentence. That's all it took. And the world would never look at him the same way again. Within minutes, the world was talking. Barron Trump had done the impossible. The moment the words left Barron Trump's mouth, the room changed. The audience had expected him to crumble. Instead, he had flipped the script, leaving them stunned, processing, re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about him. But what happened next? No one was ready for it. The first ripple came in the form of a single tweet, then another, then another. Within minutes, #Barron Trump debate was trending worldwide. Clips of his speech spread like wildfire, bouncing across social media platforms. A single sentence repeated over and over. "The people most obsessed with my last name are the ones who claim it doesn't matter." The reactions were explosive. Some were in shock. "Wait, I was not expecting that from Barron Trump." "I don't care what side you're on. That was genius." He just dismantled years of media narratives in one sentence. Others tried to discredit him. "Oh, come on. Someone had to have written that for him. He got lucky. This doesn't change anything." But it did, and they knew it. Political analysts scrambled to react. Journalists were forced to rewrite their narratives. They had expected a meltdown. Instead, they got a mic drop. News channels played the clip on repeat, dissecting every word, every pause, every reaction from the crowd. Late-night talk shows turned their monologues into post-mortems of the moment. How did Barron Trump, someone they dismissed for years, manage to outmaneuver his critics so effortlessly? But the real shock? Even some of his biggest detractors had to admit he won. And the ones who had once mocked him, they suddenly had a much bigger problem. Because now they had to respond in The critics never expected this, but now they had no choice but to respond. The backlash was immediate. Some journalists and political commentators refused to acknowledge what had happened. They doubled down, insisting that Barron's response was a fluke, that it meant nothing. But others? They weren't so sure. One political analyst, known for his sharp critiques, took to his podcast and stunned his audience. "I've been critical of the Trump family for years, but I have to be honest, that was a masterclass in debate. Barron Trump didn't just hold his own, he won." Meanwhile, the journalist who had mocked Barron on live television, the one who had sparked this entire event, was suddenly silent. No tweets, no statements, nothing, because how do you respond when the person you ridiculed just outmaneuvered you in front of the entire world? Then came the real turning point. One of the biggest names in politics, a senator who had openly dismissed Barron as irrelevant, was asked about the debate in an interview. He hesitated. Then, with a forced smile, he admitted, "Look, I may not agree with him on everything, but I'll give him this. He's got more composure than a lot of people twice his age." A small concession, but a massive moment. Because for the first time, the establishment, the critics, the media, the political elite were forced to acknowledge Barron Trump as more than just a last name. The debate had started as a test, a moment where he was supposed to fail. Instead, it became the moment he redefined his place in the conversation, and the world was just beginning to realize it. But this was never just about one sentence. It was about something much, much bigger. For most people, Barron Trump's words were a shock, a moment of clarity in a world that had already written his story before he ever spoke. But for those paying attention, it was something deeper. It wasn't just about proving his intelligence. It wasn't just about outmaneuvering his critics. It was about shattering a narrative. For years, the world had spoken about Barron as if he were an empty space, a name without substance, a figure without voice, an afterthought. But in that moment, he exposed the contradiction in their logic. They claimed his name meant nothing, but their obsession with him proved otherwise. They claimed he had no voice, but they hung onto his every word. They wanted him to fail. But when he didn't, they didn't know what to do. His words weren't just a defense. They were an attack, not on an individual, not on a journalist, not on a political party, but on an entire system that decides who gets to be taken seriously and who doesn't. Because Barron Trump did something that few had ever done in his position. He turned the microscope back on his critics, and in doing so, he forced them to ask a question they had never considered before. What if we were wrong about him? And for the first time, some of them were forced to admit, maybe they were. But this was only the beginning. Because now the question wasn't just who Barron Trump is. The question was, what does he do next? Now one question remains. What comes next? The world had expected Barron to fail. Instead, he had shifted the conversation. But what did that mean for the future? The debate had proven something undeniable. Barron Trump was no longer just a name. He was a force, a voice that could no longer be ignored. Political analysts speculated. Would he enter politics? Would he follow in his father's footsteps? Some thought he might build something of his own, an organization, a foundation, a movement. Others believed he might stay in the shadows, choosing his moments carefully, letting his actions, not the media, define him. But the truth, no one knew. And that's what made him more powerful than ever. Because for the first time, Barron Trump controlled his own story. Not the media, not the journalists, not the political elite. Him. And the world was left asking, was this just the beginning? They doubted him. They mocked him. But in one moment, Barron Trump didn't just win a debate, he changed the conversation forever. For years, they called him the silent Trump, the one who would never step forward, the one who would always be defined by his name, not his actions. But that changed, because in one defining moment, Barron Trump didn't just defend himself. He took control of his own story. He exposed the hypocrisy of his critics. He forced the world to reconsider everything they thought they knew about him. And now the world is watching. Is this the beginning of something much bigger? Is Barron Trump stepping into a future no one expected? One thing is certain. This conversation isn't over. And you've been part of it. You've witnessed how a single moment can shift everything. But what do you think happens next? Let us know in the comments. Do you see Barron Trump shaping the future? What's his next move? Hit that like button if you believe this is just the beginning. And make sure to subscribe, because this is a story far from over. Stay tuned. The best is yet to come.